I welcome you all today for the roundtable titled Opportunities, Challenges, and Future Scenarios. We have 4 speakers with us here today. Dr. Ibanez, who will be speaking about blockchain, Mr. Fabian Torres, who will give some insights on e-labeling, Professor Bernard Chen, who will throw light on artificial intelligence in the wine and wine sector, and Mr. Oliver Oran, who will share his ideas on blockchain and Internet of Things. I would like to thank you all for joining us today for this discussion on a very pressing issue in current times. As the Director General highlighted earlier, digitalization has been identified as one of the key drivers in transforming and reshaping modern society and global economic systems in the short as well as long-term future. It is therefore important to dive into ongoing debates and reflect on how to extract value from these technologies to create new opportunities for the development of the wine and wine sector. I invite all the speakers to kindly turn on their cameras and their microphones. This being said, I would like to start by asking my first question to Professor Javier Ibanez. Javier Ibanez is a professor of commercial law, head of Legal FinTech Observatory and Blockchain Lab at the Comillas University in Madrid. He is also the co-founder of Alastria Blockchain Network, first ever national public permission DLT ecosystem, and is the president of the Academic Council of the Alastria Legal. He's the director of the first World Token Conference. He has co-authored International Telecom Union Technical Specifications on Distributed Ledger Technology and is a current member of ISO Technical Committee 307. I welcome you, Dr. Ibanez. So, when we talk about blockchain, there isn't much clarity. There are many preconceived notions, preconceived myths about its lack of flexibility or its immutability. Can you perhaps explain what exactly is blockchain and talk a little bit about your experience working with it? Dr. Ibanez, can you hear us?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly fine.
Okay, Krishna. I was saying that I am grateful for this opportunity to speak within this event, and I feel pretty much comfortable within this magnificent environment. So I thank Mr. Roca for inviting me. Responding to the question, I mean, blockchain is essentially a virtual registry, only a type of DLT, also a triple accountancy system, and as well a digital identity infrastructure. I will try to explain it very briefly, since I think I have a couple of minutes to go on. It's a virtual registry or ledger shared among node or servers community in a decentralized way. And it is a space to record data, but towards legal recognition depending on national or regional jurisdiction. Decentralization implies control by managers, not just distribution or data sharing and suppression of intermediaries and or central authorities involved in data exchange. For instance, in the wine sector, there are many central authorities involved in public administrations. But secondly, it's only a type of DLT. There are many ways to interchange or exchange data in transactions, like the direct acyclic graph technology, which involves public ledgers as well. But blockchain is specifically a triple accountancy system to automatically reconcile positions and transactions, solving efficiently conflicts of accounts among peer-to-peer nodes. But this eventually requires a trusted third-party certification system. And blockchain is also a digital identity infrastructure. Blockchain can enable systems like advanced self-sovereign identity digital systems with verifiable credentials from trusted third parties to authenticate actors and things like wine. All compliant with EIDAS 2 regulation in the European Union space, empowering actors for digital identification purposes. For instance, for vineyard owners, for wine producers, cooperatives, and public supervisors involved in the transactions, in the wine transactions. And it goes beyond digital identification federated all systems. For there is full data privacy and no data silos, but specific DID transaction tokens. And blockchain finally is an ingenious virtual space to create credit rights and legally compliant token markets. There are 5 myths on blockchain I will destroy. Blockchain is equal to DLT. I have spoken already about that. Blockchain is indelible. That's false, because we can hide transactions with MetaMask or other devices. We can fork to reset the last block. We can control history of transactions by means of public nodes validating transactions. And we can also open the blockchain with qubit technology. And blockchain is inflexible. No, I don't think so, because we can efficiently program beforehand smart contracts. And blockchain is not as anonymous as people think, because in public permission distributed systems, we can pseudonymize and make public some data to bring control for public administrations and other public sector finalities as well. And blockchain is not inefficient, because we have surpassed now the hype that we have lived some years before. I will close this intervention speaking on ongoing research. We have a Comillas University FinTech Observatory and a blockchain lab, and we are treating on agricultural tokenization and digital identification by wine DIDs, and I will speak later on that.
Thank you very much, Professor Ibanez. It was actually very interesting hearing from you about digital identification in agriculture, and like you said, we will be discussing this further ahead. I would also invite you to perhaps, we had a technical problem with your camera earlier, but now we see you just fine. So thank you very much. Moving on to Mr. Fabian Torres. Fabian Torres is a principal business consultant in SICPA. He is an expert in digital transformation and has been providing consulting services to clients in their IT strategy for the last 20 years. He's also the Secretary General of the Madrid Industrial Engineering College. He sits as a board member on several associations in this field to help the digitalization of our society. We are very happy to have you here with us. Mr. Torres, so talking about e-labels to me personally, they sound like QR codes that we scan for movie tickets, or now with our COVID-19 sanitary passes, to access restaurants. So can you explain what exactly they are, and what has been your experience of working with e-labels?
First of all, it's a great pleasure for me to participate in this session. I deeply thank you, OIV, for this invitation. My deepest congrats for the chosen subject of digitalization to move forward in what I call wine 4.0. At this very moment, it is very easy to explain e-label because due to the COVID pandemic, everyone knows now how to scan a QR code and get menus in restaurants. Likewise, with our mobiles, we can scan QRs in the labels of bottles and get information such as the kind of grapes, the vineyard, the lot or the batch of the bottle, some testing characteristics like the color, the taste, the flavor, the bouquet, meals to combine with this bottle, and many other details that we can take from the bottle, just joining the QR code and linking that to the information. In SIGPA, we are now for more than 90 years protecting banknotes with security inks. I will enter on that because you mentioned the COVID pass, and we all know that COVID pass are now being fake. So the reason why I explaining that is because we are using security inks to protect the QR codes in 4 levels or with different secure inks. Some of them are visible, some of them are semi-covered, and we use, for instance, polarizing filters in order to reveal the information that is behind, or cover features that we can read with sophisticated device detectors. And for sure, also we use some tagans that in laboratories for forensic purposes, we can detect the legitimacy of the QR code. For more than 20 years, we are already protecting goods in many industries using QR codes and data matrix. Some of them are visible and some of them are also invisible. And we are just proving the full traceability of the products. We use also 4 dimensions on the digital security of the QR codes. First is we crypto code the QR code with sophisticated mathematical algorithms. Secondly, we activate the QR codes in the digital manner. And then we use also specific algorithms for graphical printing to protect the QR. And also, finally, we hash the QR to be uploaded to the blockchain. So for that reason, we called that as secure 4x4 QR codes that are the most relevant and unique anti-counterfeit solution in the market. That's very important in order to avoid the faking of QR codes. And that's some of our experience on many fields and industries. But we have, for instance, in Spain, already for more than 10 years working in the wine sector, in the CTOV. That's something that you can easily find Googling in the net. Is the Centro Técnico Operativo del Vino, the operational technical center of wine. That is a project in very innovative and experimenting all things related to the e-label techniques in order to access to information, as I said, just reading the QR codes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Torres. It was actually very interesting, and hearing from you give a very simple understanding of what e-labels are, and also addressing the fears related to forging QR codes. It's a very important topic to discuss, and we will talk about this further ahead. Now I would like to move on to Professor Chen. Dr. Bernard Chen has a PhD degree in computer science with concentration in bioinformatics from Georgia State University. In 2008, he joined University of Central Arkansas as an assistant professor in the computer science department, where he continued his research in bioinformatics and medical informatics. After tenured, he merged his interest of wine with his research and uses natural language processing to process wine reviews into computer understandable format and is currently involved in wine judges' evaluation and ranking, wine price estimation, modeling the wine reviewers' evaluation logics, and more. Thank you very much, Professor Chen. I would like to hear from you a little bit about what exactly artificial intelligence is and how it is being implemented in the wine and wine sector currently. And then in future discussions, we'll also talk a little bit about your research, which is one of the key applications of AI. So thank you, the floor is yours.
Sure. Now, in these days, computers are everywhere in every industry. And because of that, data are collected, whether you like it or not. So with data, lots of useful information can be collected and generated. And that is where AI meant for assistant human in many different ways. Of course, in wine and wine sector, AI are beneficial, in my opinion, to two major group of people, winemakers and wine consumers. So for winemakers, drones and robots can be very helpful in grape production. Now think about this, drones can fly overhead and then tell the grape growers exactly which vines need to be watered and can be helped with all sorts of soil issues. Not only we can see the current conditions, AI can be helpful by using the current information to do the prediction of possible problems in the near future. At the same time, robots can be connected with the drones, and then they would be able to do the groundwork in this, what we call the small wine vineyard concepts. Or the robots can also equip by working their own with some combination of sensors, probes, and X-rays together and analyze millions of data points that help standardize and improve wine growth, detect problems such as virus, insects, or broken water pipes before they can impede the growth. As to the winemaking process, AI can be also useful to inform the best condition for the wine fermentation, production, and storage, etc. Some concrete examples are like they can prediction of stock fermentation risk as well as estimation of the possible pollution charge. So that is about the wine growers' perspective. For wine consumers, there are many different ways of helping peoples in these days already. So like since everyone has different testing buds, for many e-commerce sites that selling wine, they would want you to answer some wine preferences problems as what they call the quiz. And based on that, they can analyze what kind of wines that you may really enjoy and give you the best suggestions that they have of the wine for you to make the purchase. And hopefully they can have get their what they call a high convergence rate. The risk of the rise of the personal sommelier is another thing. For usually you only have like high-end restaurants are able to afford the sommeliers. In these days, if we are looking at some medium level of restaurants or even your home cooking, you want to find the best pairing of for the wines, that can be a helpful thing. And finally, the AI-empowered wine critics and judges might be able to learn from wine expert reviews, and they can know what are the reviewers thinking about so that they can use those information to find the wine characteristics, the quality, the price, and even the scores of the wine. So this can help the consumers to find the best wines that they are interested as well as within the budgets that they have. So in short, AI exists everywhere in our daily life, and it is already impacting or helping us to enjoy the wines in many, many different ways.
Thank you very much, Professor Chen. This is a very interesting, holistic overview of the application of artificial intelligence for all the stakeholders in the value chain. So thank you. Turning on to our final speaker, Mr. Oram. Oliver Oram is the CEO of Chain1, a company that manages supply chain data across different industries in a highly secure manner. For many years, Oliver has worked with fintech and financial data. It was on a plane traveling from Sweden to UK 7 years ago that Oliver first came across Rudy Kunjaven, possibly the world's greatest wine fraudster that has ever been caught. Oliver decided that blockchain would be a great way to tackle wine fraud and founded Chain Wine. Now, Oliver and Chain Wine work with wineries, wine groups, and governments all over the world, applying technology to reduce the cost of trust in moving wine all over and around the world. Oliver, I also know you're quite an expert on Internet of Things. And this is a very interesting story of how you first started Chain Wine for the application of blockchain with the integration of Internet of Things into the wine and wine sector. So can you perhaps start by elaborating what exactly is Internet of Things, and then maybe talk about your experience of integrating it with blockchain?
Yeah. Thank you, Krisha. Thank you for the really nice introduction. Thank you to the OIV for having me today, and Mr. Roker. I think you guys have done my job for me now. I'm going to have to think of something interesting to say. But yes, I found a chain vine around the idea that wine fraud and essentially Rudy Kunjaven was a great solution or problem to solve, and we had a solution. Now, what we did was essentially we integrated Internet of Things, which could be a QR code or a device in some cases, and I'll explain the device in a moment. But I think actually I can tell you this more about the IoT and the blockchain in the story. Now, if you see, I don't know if everyone can see the picture behind me. There's two wine bottles on stage, and this was in 2018. And what you're seeing behind me is actually the world's first intelligent wine. Now, what is intelligent wine? It's essentially wine that tells you its health, wealth, and happiness. And how do we do that? We used blockchain and Internet of Things. And it basically, our first trial of this involved me traveling all across Europe from London. So one day I left London with two bottles of wine behind me. They had the IoT devices on them. I traveled from London to Brussels, Brussels to Amsterdam, went to a financial event where there were some bankers, and they said, "Oh, what's that you've got there, Oliver?" I said, "It's intelligent wine." They said, "What does that happen? Does it make you intelligent if you drink it?" I said, "No, it just carries a lot of intelligence on it." So I traveled from Brussels to Amsterdam, then Amsterdam up to Hamburg, then to Copenhagen, then to Stockholm. And I was on the stage here, as you can see behind me, at Sweden Food Tech. Now, in every city that I stopped in, I scanned the wine simply with a mobile phone, via Bluetooth, or in some cases, I scanned a QR code. And what I was doing was checking, in some cases, with the IoT device that was giving me data on the wine, the temperature, the humidity, the geolocation, which is really critical to wine fraud, in my opinion, and any type of problems that producers have with parallel importing also. But essentially what I was doing was capturing the data as if I was a different trader. So in real life, this would have been traded between two different people, but in fact, I was trading it to myself. And what I was doing was handshaking via the blockchain that was auditing when I did it and who I did it with. So it's a really simple but elegant solution, basically using the Internet of Things to capture the geolocation or be a gateway to the access of the data that I needed. And the Internet of Things really, if it's a QR code or even a device, is very much a gateway to access data. It's as simple as that. It's like a key. Your mobile phone is actually your identity product. So you're identifying anyone who scans that QR code, they're being identified by your two-factor authentication. But what we essentially did was prove that the supply chain today is seriously broken. And by using this technology, which is extremely accessible, I would say that if anyone's got a mobile phone, you can access this technology. You don't have to buy a massive mainframe computer or something. But what we showed was actually that a wine could travel through 5 different countries across borders and show how it was feeling, how much it was worth, and who it was with. And that was essentially by meshing Internet of Things technology with blockchain. And it is as simple as that. And what the great thing about the IoT device and what actually Fabian was saying about the QR codes is that they're a perfect way to actually access and share data. Think about if you're a winery, your bottle of wine has left the vineyard, but you would like to share some information about this bottle, perhaps 6 months later. Now, you can actually do that now. So the intelligent bottle of a wine allows the producer to actually change that data after the bottle's left the vineyard in case they want to update the consumer or the end retailer on that product. And that is essentially how the Internet of Things works with distributed ledger. I mean, I could go into great detail about technology, but I think the story is better. What is intelligent wine? It just travels around telling you its health, wealth, and happiness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oliver. That was indeed a very interesting story about the intelligent wine and how you use blockchain to tackle wine fraud. So moving on to the next section in our roundtable, where we would like to go a little bit of detail in all the technologies. I would first like to ask a question to Mr. Torres. So referencing the report that was presented earlier today, we saw that e-labeling is essentially applied and affects the last stage of the value chain, which is the distribution stage. So can you please elaborate on some benefits that it provides mainly to producers, consumers, and regulators?
Thank you for the question. In fact, we can say that is the perfect tool in order to bring transparency to the market from end to end. I mean, as I mentioned, we can dig in all the information of the bottle of wine that we are having in front of us, thanks to this QR code. We can check the ingredients, the components, the way in which it is produced, and then we can move up in the value chain to also check the sustainability topics that are now in fashion, especially on millennials. To know exactly what are the grapes and how have been cultivated, what was the status of the soil, where were exactly produced, if we have been using fertilizers or perhaps risky pesticides. So this is the kind of information that we can bring in order to provide transparency. It's an incredible tool for track and trace. As I said, along the last 10 years, we have been proving that with a high level of success in this CTOV project in Spain. Is an excellent way in order to highlight and improve the image of innovation of the wine manufacturers. As I said, also now, thanks to these 4x4 QR codes, is a great tool to avoid falsification, counterfeit, diversion, all the things that we are mentioning. Even more, we have developed some incredible secure inks that are thermal color shift inks. That means that we can control if the capsules has been heated in order to remove it from the bottle and to avoid the refilling of bottles. That is a risk nowadays on the market. So for the first time, is a bi-directional communication channel that we can open in between the manufacturer and the final client. And that's provide incredible value to the firm to increase especially the customer loyalty. Talking about the opportunities that we can face now, let me emphasize on the Green Deal. The Green Deal, I think that is the big opportunity now from the point of view of the vineyards and the wine manufacturers to digitalize and sensorize the soil, as it has been mentioned. There is 1 trillion euros that is waiting for topics related to this sensorization, digitalization, and sustainability. The money is there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Torres, for this detailed explanation. This clearly puts a lot of things into light. So Mr. Torres spoke about transparency and how it reinstates authenticity of a bottle. And some of the most commonly heard applications and benefits of blockchain as well are traceability and transparency and how it provides information of a wine bottle from the vineyard to the glass. So these are very consumer-centric technologies, and the benefits that consumers gain are quite apparent. Dr. Ibanez, could you perhaps highlight some benefits that other stakeholders could accrue and could gain from the application of blockchain in the wine and wine sector? You're on mute. We cannot hear you. Yes. If if you bring your microphone closer to your mic, we have a small technical problem here. Perhaps we could move on. We cannot hear you, Dr. Ibanez. So we can perhaps move on to the next question and come back to Dr. Ibanez shortly. So I would like to now go back to Oliver Oram. So, you know, you spoke about chain wine and how you found your founding story. Could you perhaps also talk about some currently promising real-world applications of blockchain and how, you know, it's being applied in the wine and wine sector in present times?
Yeah, thanks, Krisha. So actually, I'll just follow on the narration, really. I believe there's many real-world cases going on, but I believe this case that I'm about to talk to you about will be fascinating, I believe, for many people, because it is one of the most exciting consortiums that ever got involved in a project. So I'll go back to Intelligent Wine just quickly. About a year after I was at Sweden Food Tech, I was asked by HMRC, which is the UK Revenue and Customs Collection Agency. And they said, please, Oliver, could you explain blockchain and Internet of Things, just if you've just asked me. So I said, actually, I'm not going to talk about that, but I will tell you what an intelligent bottle of wine is. It's a bottle of wine moving around, sharing its data. Now, HMRC turned around and said, well, if you have all of this data, Oliver, would your clients be willing to share that data with us? And why would my clients want to share their data with the taxman? I mean, you know, we all love the taxman, of course, but opening up our databases sometimes feels a bit like exposure. What I would say is this. What HMRC basically said is, if they could access that data, perhaps we could get to a world where there would be no more paper declarations. Now, I'm going to go into a bit of the project and give you some details of what's been going on in the project. So for around about 2.5 years, we've been working with HMRC in the UK, the FSA, the Food Standards Agency, and the Wine and Spirits Trade Association in the UK, and producers in Australia. And basically what we've been doing is parallel digital shipments of wine from Australia to the United Kingdom to prove that you no longer need paperwork declaration to declare your how would you say, goods coming into the UK. And we focus purely on the wine sector there. And why the wine sector? Because actually, if you think about it, the movement of wine is quite technical in many regards. And if there's a mistake in moving wine or a mistake in the paperwork, we all know that wine can either get frozen and damaged through freeze, or it can be overcooked if it's left on a port because the paperwork's wrong. So what we've been doing is actually showing that you don't need actually all of these declarations. We've been using a distributed ledger, connecting everyone in the supply chain. So as my fellow speakers have been saying, this is a great auditing tool. It is absolutely brilliant for auditing your data. But if you apply that to the supply chain and you can audit the whereabouts of your wine, who your wine is with, why are there delays, where are the delays? And you begin to see that actually this is one of the most perfect solutions for today's broken supply chain. Now, that's a real world case. We've been doing that for 2 years. Some of the data we've seen back from that, and this is independent data that has looked, it's academic data looking in on the project, has shown that we could reduce the cost of declarations by up to 60 to 50%. 15 billion pounds a year is spent on paperwork in the EU and UK on customs declarations and paperwork. And to me, that is not economically sustainable, and it's certainly not environmentally sustainable. So what we're saying is actually via DLT, we could open up the databases of the vineyards themselves. And the vineyard actually wouldn't have to do any extra work. And if you think about the savings, many of the SME small vineyards, if we can begin to create these savings for them, they can actually push that back into their own production. And I think that's the most powerful thing about this technology at the moment. It's fascinating, but the features and benefits that we're beginning to see push through in real world cases now are absolutely brilliant. And I just want to say to the SMEs, for you, I believe they would be game changing in the sense of making business more viable and vital. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Oliver. These real-world applications that you spoke about, they make these surreal technologies so much more conceivable and so much more understandable for the common man. So I would like to understand, what artificial intelligence has to offer now, and going to Professor Chen. So I learned before that your research, before your research, most of the data sets had about 100 wines or even lesser as input data. With your work, you're dealing with more than 100,000 wines as the input data set. So this sounds really cool. So I want to learn a little bit more about wine informatics and your research, which is indeed a real world application of artificial intelligence in the wine and wine sector. So the floor is all yours.
Sure. So, to evaluate the quality of the wine, there are two major ways. One is using the chemical analysis. The other one is like wine reviews from wine experts. For chemical analysis, it's actually more useful to the winemaker's aspect, because obviously you are not going to like a wine because its alcohol value is 14% and the pH value is 4, right? Therefore, we as consumers, we want to see the wine reviews. We want to rely on them to tell us what do they think about the wine, and are those wines worth the money that we pay for, and can we enjoy it? So there are several reputable wine judges in the world right now, or the organization. Some of them are famous Robert Parker, and magazines such as Decanter, Wine Spectator, Wine Enthusiastic. They are all doing similar jobs. And think about this. Using Wine Spectator as an example, they have more than 400,000 wine reviews sitting in their database. And no one is actually doing analysis of those information, because those reviews are stored in human language formats, which are hard to understandable by humans, by computers. They are meant for humans. Unlike chemical analysis, they are numbers. Computers can easily grab those information and do different analysis. And that's why I feel it is quite important to get those information, because that's actually the historical data back to 1980s. And they have tested all kinds of different wines or important wines that are probably not available these days right now. And those are, to me, are very, very important and valuable information. Therefore, in order to make sure computers be able to understand those wine reviews, we have developed what we call a computational wine wheel to do what we call the natural language processing work, so that computers can understand those reviews. So in our process, we try to convert those reviews into 3 major groups of what we call the attributes automatically. That's the important thing. So the first group is what we call the flavorful attributes, such as blueberry, blackcurrant, those kind of things. The second group is non-flavor attributes, such as body and acidity and tannin, those kind of things. Finally, we have also a very important group of attributes, what we call the adjectives, such as harmonious or balanced wine. Those kind of information also described the wines in a very abstract way, but they are actually very useful in our analysis. So in this case, we are able to process, depending on our targets, we can easily get tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands wines at the same time, and then try to analyze those group of data set in different ways. For example, what we can try to see what makes a wine become a 90+ wine in a general or specific wine region. What are the wine's characteristics of a terroir? What's the difference between 1980s and the current 21st century Bordeaux wines? They obviously have different technology involved, and what's the growth, what's the differences that we have made. We can also use those information to evaluate the wine judges themselves. Are they providing a consistent wine evaluation? Or maybe there's a group of wine reviewers, such as Wine Spectator has 10 different reviewers in their system. We can rank them one by one according to the consistency of their reviews that they provide. So based on these kind of works, we have published like more than about 20 different research papers as well as theses to answer those kind of different questions through various data mining, data science algorithms. So as a computer scientist, we care about where the data come from, and we also care about how do we use those computer algorithms or techniques to retrieve the information or the knowledge that we're interested in. So the ultimate goal is try to understand those reviewers, and then with the help of chemical analysis compound, that we are able to use computers basically to evaluate the wines. So that's kind of our ultimate holy grail that we are looking at.
Thank you, Professor Chen. Your work sounds very interesting and so relevant in, in the scope of all the subjectivity that, surrounds wine reviews. So thank you very much. However, I do have a follow-up question. So, as with all technologies, there's this fear that there's going to be loss of jobs. Machines are going to replace mankind. So will AI and will your research replace sommeliers, for example? Yeah.
Thanks for the follow-up question. Of course, I don't think that's the goal of AI. With the AI at the current stage, I believe it is used to help or to assist humans in different ways. Just use my experiences working with medical data, what we call medical informatics previously. We try to analyze cancer images, and we use that to predict whether or not the patient has the cancer. However, we are not trying to replace the doctor's role at all. We are merely trying to provide some useful tools so that the patients at home can have some fast, quick test. Because if you go to a doctor, it costs a lot of money. And sometimes if you go there, they spend 20 seconds and tell you, you don't need to worry about it. And therefore, what we try to do at that stage is try to provide a very approachable way to see that if this person needs to go to a sick doctor in a fast fashion. So that's the balance between human and AI is going to be how do AI assist to make things easier to be approachable. So like currently, the computational wine wheel we try to generate is coming from wine spectator reviews. And it is still an important approach to merge different wine reviewers' perspective. And so what we are, the ongoing research that we are doing right now is how do we try to merge the ideas from Wine Spectator and Robert Parker. And we try to evaluate how can we harmoniously merging the two informations and they are not contradicting with each other. Because if you take a look of 2005 Chateau Latour, there are 5 different reviewers reviewing it. The score are very close. 4 of them are 100 points, one is 99, the other one is 96. So the points, the verdicts are similar. However, if you look into their reviews, they all talk about different things. And that's the interesting part of it. So one important approach that we are trying to do is we try to merge those informations and to train the computer to understand different perspectives. So that is like what we call the ultimate goal. Of course, that requires a lot of works, not only in machine computer perspective, but also like chemical and compound analysis, try to get the flavors, try to get those molecule information so that we can merge from different ways. And therefore, in short, we are not trying to replace the jobs or anything. We try to provide an alternative, objective way of evaluating the wines.
Thank you very much for this clarification. It was indeed very necessary. We had a small technical problem earlier. So going back to my question to Dr. Javier Ibanez. So as Mr. Torres was talking about how e-labeling reinstates authenticity of a wine bottle, And blockchain has similar benefits that are very consumer-centric. It provides transparency and traceability. So I wanted to understand from you, what are some other benefits for the other stakeholders, and how do you kind of incentivize them to implement this technology? The floor is yours. You're on mute.
No.
We hear you.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. As you see, Bernard, artificial intelligence is much better than Zoom technology. So I had many delays. I hope there will be no more problems going on from now. I have to say, I have to outline that we should take a multi-stakeholder approach within this point. There are many, many social benefits from DLT, not directed to consumers, but to the whole value chain. But the value chain of wine involves producers, wine cooperatives as well. For example, in wine cooperatives, the incentives are double. Marketing incentives and operation in new wine reference token markets. You know that there are now, within MiCA regulation, expectations for the creation of wine reference token markets as a part of the asset reference token markets. In Castilla-La Mancha, Digital Innovation Hub, within Spain's Alastria ecosystem, we have a huge opportunity to create a field of experimentation for the efficient exchange of wine documentation. For instance, the documentation of denomination of origin, and for the full traceability of wine and wine tokenization to enhance global exporting of wine. This is important to transform the business model of producers and wine cooperatives. We have also involved the interprofessional associations in Spain. It's very important for the assignment of responsibility for the attribution of civil and administrative liability against fraudsters or scammers. Who is accountable in a blockchain? There are many legal problems posed directed to specifically to interprofessional associations and its members. Afterwards, we have value adders in the chain, labelers, who attach papers to bottles to designate the origin in wine denominations of origin. Appellation d'origine contrôlée in France. We have also intermediaries involved, distributors. Distributors can control prices through blockchain future markets on wine futures. And the tokenization of futures is involved with all agricultural and agro-nutritional experience. For instance, in Spain, we have the olive oil experience involving exporters, shippers. Many of these intermediaries have negative incentives. For instance, brokers retaining production. This doesn't happen exactly the same in the wine sector, but public administrations should be aware of the control and compliance costs involved and the cost reduction involved in all wine denomination of origin processes. The problems are similar in geographical indications of provenance. And afterwards, we have the problem of the social utilities from proof of authority and other DLT networks. Proof of authority is a protocol for public permissioned distributed ledgers like Alastria node validators, We have in Alastria T networks going on with Ethereum protocol. We have Besu protocol also going on, and we have Hyperledger Fabric protocol devices implemented and ready to apply Alastria T network operation and governance or government inner policies. If you read section 3.1.2, there is an article entitled Inclusiveness of Nodes. Within a proof of authority approach, a network requires permitting only transactions for nodes that can modify the blockchain. And public administrations involved in the wine tokenization processes should be able to do this. For the access is asymmetrical. The optimal access of nodes to the blockchain transactions should be asymmetrical within the scope of a proof of authority protocol. This point is crucial for the free reading access, for the optimal free reading access to the node information, and it does not occur in many public permissioned networks all over the world. This is, for instance, the case of Alastria partner node T network. And finally, I should outline that there are digital innovation hubs providing holistic utilities for the wine sector. For instance, shared governance of wine transaction, development of wine community clusters and IT ecosystems and specific DIH devices to incorporate updated innovative digital devices to create value, connecting the stakeholders, and the facilitation of a wine token transaction environment through new tokens conceived as digital representations of value. The concept of representation of value has been outlined in the ITU, International Telecommunications Union standards, and I personally participated in its formation. For such standards to be fully compliant with the concept of legal smart contract.
Thank you very much.
Authorized platforms. I don't know if you're hearing me or if there is a delay. Is there?
Yes, we are experiencing a delay and we do not hear your audio very clearly, because of which also there might be a problem in translations. So I would also invite you to put your contact details on the chat so that people who have questions can reach out to you directly if that is fine by you. And I really want to thank you for your intervention, because you outlined so many interesting points and so many interesting benefits that blockchain brings out to, that blockchain offers to all the stakeholders in the sector. So I have a question for you, Oliver. So as we heard from Professor Ibanez, there are so many benefits that blockchain has to offer and provide to the wine and wine sector, but we still see that the adoption rate is very low. So why is this the case, and what are the regulatory challenges that blockchain is facing, in the implementation in the wine and wine sector?
Okay, let's get it. I was just thinking of Bernard's technology there, because I was just thinking I've created wine that can tell you how it is, but then it can also say this is what people think of me as well. So maybe that will be my next step to put on the bottles. We can actually have the voice of many about the one. So it's a really good question, and it's all about data and empirical data. So we need to collect data to show things work. Think about this like a new winery. It takes almost the third harvest for the growers' grapes to actually have a good yield, doesn't it? So you begin a vineyard, but you're not going to have wine immediately. You've got to grow 1 year, grow the second year, and perhaps by the third year, you've got enough empirical data to say, actually, everything's beginning to match up, the wine's ready for sale. So this is very much like technology. And blockchain technology has been around a long time, but it hasn't been experimented with for a very long time. So if you think about new software technologies, generally around about 7 to 8 years to come to yield, if you like. I believe we're around about on the 6-year stage now. And as you're doing all of these experiments, as you're doing these minimal viable products, we call them in technology, and you're proving the fact that, hey, if you put technology on a bottle of wine, that bottle of wine can be compliant to the regulator. The bottle of wine can share information with the consumer, and the bottle of wine can be used as a way to check your own stock, wherever it is and how it is. Now, you have to keep on experimenting because you have to convince the regulators that you've got something better than they have. And at the minute, the regulators only have one thing really, and it's called paper, and it's absolutely useless. And I'll explain why that is. If you think about COVID and how it's affected us all, I live in Sweden most of the time. We barely use cash anymore in Sweden, right? But for years, it's taken time to everyone to adapt to mobile payments and digital payments. But now it's like second nature. So this is where we are really in the technology life cycle. We're at the place where all of these real world cases will come to commercialization next year. And you'll see the industry adopt it, but the industry needs education. They need education in very practical ways. I also work with the OECD on the Raw Innovation Committee. And one thing the SMEs, and I don't blame them, they don't have time to do massive research into technology. They need something quick and efficient. So they need to be educated that actually you don't need to know about the internet to access your banking app. And we need to give them practical, real life stories, as I've told you today, about reducing friction in trade project with HMRC, intelligent wine for gathering and monitoring data. And what we need to say really to the industry is that the technology is highly accessible and beneficial to you. So we need to educate more on the benefits and the features of this technology for the industry itself. And then the industry, working with industry, we need to go back to government and regulators and say, look, this is a much better way for us to share our data with you. It's a much better way for us to be compliant with the food standards agencies of our respective countries. And I actually believe that this is where the OIV itself can play a fundamental part in this. You have access across many different geolocations, up to 48 countries. And this is where you can begin to actually share and disperse this knowledge in a very accessible way, I'd say, and actually begin to shape the policies of the future. How will we be moving our wine in the future? Do we need a stack of paper this high to move the wine, almost half a tree trunk, I like to call it, to get the wine across the border? So the main problems I see and the challenges are education and regulatory data. How do we apply existing technologies such as financial services has? For example, we can learn from them, and we can apply a lot of the financial service technology to the wine sector. And I'll just leave you one last example. Think about how we transfer money today. There's a global system for this called SWIFT in the banking nations, right? What we're trying to do, and I believe what all of my fellow panelists are trying to do here, is create a SWIFT for wine. Let's move wine around the globe with absolutely no friction. And let's do it without paper, and let's save the environment, and let's give some cash back to the producers. And I think that's all of what we're all trying to do. But we just need to educate and help the regulators understand what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oliver. That's a very, very interesting point you raised about the role of public institutions and the role that OIV can play in standardization and in the creation of international standards. So I want to know from you, Fabienne, what is your view on the role of the support of public institutions, and what does the future of e-labels look like for you in the wine and wine sector?
Okay, I don't know if I am authorized to be seen by the video, but I will go on speaking now. There are many, okay, that's okay. I have been authorized to be seen. Thank you very much. There are many regulatory threats to be resolved by legislators and supervisors. I am not sure that you can fully understand my viewpoint, for you're not lawyers. But there are many legal problems encountered by DLT, as the focus group on DLT of the International Telecommunications Union posted on 2019. There is a paper I would recommend to read to all of you, entitled DLT Regulatory Framework. It is a technical report D4.1 of the focus group on DLT of ITU. And there are many huge challenges posed by, for instance, and first of all, GDPR regulation. First, the problem of responsibility and accountability of decentralized validators. Second, the validity of pseudonymity protective agreements. Third, the question of the right to be forgotten. Blockchain has not been created to be forgotten. Transactions cannot be removed in theory, but they can be controlled. But who is responsible for that? And which are the civil liability consequences? Engineers should be more aware of this, because there can be not only fines, but the loss of credibility of the whole sector as a consequence of GDPR issues involved. And the transfer of transaction data to third countries. Is there any real global trust for data involved in transactions? Secondly, and in the field of smart contracts and decentralized applications layers, we have found many problems of enforceability of smart contracts and ADRs in different jurisdictions. As shown in the Alestria Legal Committee, in the INATBA committees and legal task forces, and also in the European Parliament and in the Council, with the occasion of the digital finance strategy. We need a secure and homogeneous legal framework for wine platforms in the European Union, if they are to be created. Also in the field of cybersecurity, applied regulatory solutions should be created, because we have no equivalent to the DORA proposals for the DORA proposals for the financial sector, for the DeFi sector. And the decentralized finance has found its own regulatory solutions, but in the one sector, those solutions, those legal solutions, could not be applicable. We have a framework for the digital resilience, but just for financial transactions. And this could also involve tokens of wine.
Thank you.
And within the scope of private international law, we find many difficulties for the determination of applicable law in competent tribunals. And there are many other relevant legal issues concerning the degree of applicability of MiCA regulation and wine tokens as possible asset reference tokens in markets in crypto assets. New regulation within the European Financial Strategy framework, legal framework. So,
thank you. Yes.
But I have no time to develop, obviously, just to post the general.
Absolutely. No, but thank you. Yes, but the insights that you shared on the role of public institutions throws a lot of light on, what is needed in the upcoming years, the direction that the sector needs in the short-term future. So I really want to thank you very much for your opinions and for your thoughts. And I want to thank all our other speakers for your enriching inputs and contributions. I thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you all. So it is now time to hear some questions from our audience. and we surprisingly have a lot of questions on all the technologies that we've covered today. So I would like to start with the first question, that is for Mr. Torres. We have a question here that says labels for blind people are not very developed. Do you think digitalization can help on this?
Yeah, in fact, we are developing solutions now for especially or specifically for blind people, and that's related to the evolution on the digitalization of voice and the voice recognition. That is at this very moment at a very good state of the art from the point of view of, let's say, the identification of people. So it's not only in order to connect with them, but also to identify them thanks to the voice recognition. And we are in our labs, in our digital lab now at this very moment, in very good essays and tests of this brand new technology that will be very inclusive. Inclusivity is one of our key elements in our DNA in order to facilitate the adoption of technology for all the people.
Thank you very much, Mr. Torres.
My pleasure.
Moving on, we have a question for Oliver. Oliver, which DLT is being used for chain volume?
Yeah, I'm really glad somebody asked that question, actually, because we're not using what I would call a public blockchain. We're using permissioned distributed ledgers. So we are using actually Fabric and Corda. Fabric was designed by mainly IBM. So it's very much a corporate distributed ledger where you would only allow people in if they're part of the consortium. So it's very designed for the corporate world and the business world, right? Because if you can't be using open and accessible databases for everyone where things are validated by total strangers. And so it's very key to distinguish between the different technologies. Like there's many different types of code. There's many different flavors of blockchain and distributed ledger. Corda, the other code we're using, was actually designed by a group called R3 for the banking sector. And that's being used actually now in the supply chain as well. And it's also being used in a couple of trials around the world on the movement of land and property deeds. So these are for what I would call the most kind of corporate accessible to the industry. And there's no reason why this technology can't be used now.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Moving on to our next question, we have a question for Professor Chen. Do you work on reviews coming from social media? If yes, is there a problem of lack of a standard vocabulary?
Yes, that's a very good question. Right now, I'm more focused on the professional reviews because they will be able to provide a more complete perspective of the wine. However, working with the social media as well as a consumer's review is a great part to work on what we call the crowdsourcing aspects of the data science. And that can actually build what we call a real big data in terms of capturing what regular people or the regular consumers' point of view regarding to the wine, and that may be even more closer to the consumer's perspective. So that is one important areas that we want to touch. As to the vocabularies, we try to build the vocabularies from professional wine reviewers, while we try to capture maybe 3, 4, or 5 reviewers in our perspective that can cover most of the words that are used in wine reviews already. So that should be able to analyze what we call, or what you so-called more or less unstructured reviews. So that, and the good part of computer is that they don't need to capture 100% exactly information. As long as they can capture the most important part, 90% of the keywords, that should be able to use to analyze what we call the wine review analysis already. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Chen. So talking about big data, digital transformation of the sector is inevitably going to generate a huge amount of data and new sources of data. So there are a lot of questions about how to address the issue of data ownership, data accessibility, management of these new types of data. I would like to start with Professor Javier Ibanez. So when it comes to data exchange, is there a need for standards, and how would you address the issue of data ownership and accessibility? You're on mute. You need to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Krisha. It's not only a matter of data accessibility, but it's a matter of responsibility in the management of data. According to GDPR, data protection regulation, there are many issues involved because there are different roles in the approach of GDPR for validators, for administrators, because just a couple of minutes ago, Oliver spoke on Corda and spoke about Hyperledger Fabric. We have all possibilities involved in Alastria consortium, but it's a public permissioned DLT. Thus, the situation with respect of the responsibility of nodes within the standpoint of or viewpoint of general data protection regulation is quite different, because the responsibility of node managers is not the same, for instance, using a protocol involved in Hyperledger Fabric, just private or purely permissioned ledgers, as it is in the case of public permissioned ledgers using a proof of authority protocol. And there are fine nuances that have to be into account but in the regulation, but I have no time to expose and post them all.
Thank you.
But it's quite a complex question to be solved in a couple of minutes. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
If there is someone, contact him. So.
I want to hear from Fabian. Fabian, what is your take on this? What are the key questions that need to be answered when it comes to ownership and management of these new kinds of data?
At this very moment, this is the typical topic that is on the nets. Who is the owner of data and things like that? And thanks to blockchain, what we are doing now is give all the authority on ownership of data to each person individually. So we are going to be able to manage our information and to provide the information we want to share with a certain party without disclosing all the information that at this very moment we used to provide. For instance, if I go to, I don't know, to buy a bottle of wine and it's forbidden to be sold for people that is less than 16 or 18 years, depending on the country, only thing we need to demonstrate is that I am older than 16 or 18 and nothing more. So thanks to blockchain and this ownership of data, we will be able to disclose just this information. I am allowed to buy wine. and the people that is selling the wine will not know where is my address, what's my name and my telephone, or all the data that I can show easily if I let them know my passport or I provide him my identity card.
I see. Thank you very much, Fabian. Well, we're kind of running short on time, but we're going to take a couple of last questions. So moving on to the next question, I have a question for Oliver. Oliver, can blockchain alone provide legitimacy to wine?
No, I don't think blockchain alone is the entire answer. It's just piece of the puzzle, right? And when I founded Chainvine, one of the greatest parts that inspired me was how Rudy Canaravan finally got caught, and that was that a bottle of Ponsert wine was being sold in New York. And I believe Charles Ponsert turned up at the auction and said, "You can't possibly be selling my wine because I didn't start making it to 1980. So I don't know why you've got a 67 and a 73 there," or something like those years. Now, what blockchain can do, and I just go back to your question before about data, right? I find this really fascinating because I would think that actually with this technology, I actually believe we can give that data back to the producers and they should own that data. And what distributed ledger blockchain enables us to do is actually manage that data really well, just as Javier and Fabian were saying. And I believe that data will be something like a tax return in the future and your health records, right? So if you go to the doctor, you actually take care of your own data. You're telling the doctor how you feel and what your problems are in your history. So you manage that data already. When you do your tax return every year, you're responsible for that data. So I think what we're actually doing is enabling the producers in the wine industry to take care of their data in a better way and manage that data in a better way and control the data in ways that they want it controlled and not others. And the same as the consumer data, the consumer can decide whether or not they want to share data with the producer. And I think this is just a very democratic way of doing it and a more traceable and transparent way of doing it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Oliver, for your precise answer. So now, I would like to conclude our discussion, and before we end our extremely enlightening chat that we had today, I would like to hear some final opinions. I would like to hear what are your final messages. So I'll start with Fabian. Fabian, what is your final message that you would like to give to our participants and to the sector as a whole?
As a final takeaway, let me say that for me, digitalization will be based on e-labels, but with secure 4x4 QR codes that will also enable as a natural link for the blockchain adoption in what I call wine 4.0. But let me just add that for me, as Mr. Roca was mentioning at the beginning, the digitalization to go from grape to glass, in this digitalization, I strongly believe that OIV, as a scientific and technical intergovernmental organization, can play a key role in the harmonization and adaptation of all the regulations to guide and contribute in the digitalization through e-labeling, for instance, to protect consumers and wine producers of the illicit trade. So for me, OIV has a critical and very important role in the near future of the digitalization of this industry.
Thank you very much, Fabian. Dr. Ibanez, I would briefly like to understand what is the message that you would like our audience to take home. You're muted.
Three main messages, Teresa, very briefly. First, public permissioned distributed ledgers are ready today to bring transparency and economic huge benefits for all stakeholders in the wine sector. The preferred vehicle is digital innovation wine hubs with the cooperation of public sector sandbox public sector support. Second, supervised interprofessional compromises are to be developed in order to efficiently pilot proofs of concept, incorporating entrepreneurial experience like yours. And third, cross-border institutions like your organization, OIV, must play a key role in public sector coordination at the multilateral level and in the creation of standards of best practices and key proofs of concept in wine tokenization and in general in wine digitization.
Thank you very much, Professor Ibanez. Oliver, what would be your concluding message to our audience?
Thanks. So my concluding message would be educate yourselves. I was at a conference the other week, and somebody was asking questions about technology and how regulation could help people with technology. But there's one thing we can't regulate against, and that's stupidity. So you've really got to educate yourselves on technology. And really, my final takeaway for the industry is when I first started chain wine, everyone said, "Oh, this is great technology, but it's just for fine wine, isn't it, Oliver?" No, that's not the case. As we've found out now, it's for every bottle of wine. So I would just say this technology is accessible and it will be made easy to use for any vineyard, whether you're producing a bottle of €7 wine or a bottle of €700 wine. This technology will be on every bottle of wine in the near future. That's my takeaway from it. But do educate yourselves, and always, I just say to your audience, always feel free to reach out to me. I love sharing knowledge. So thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Finally, Dr. Bernard Chen. So based on all our discussions that we had, what would be a final quote that would be applicable to the sector? What message would you like to give?
Technology changes every day and it affects our daily life. AI can be very useful tool, or machine learning or data science. That's all kind of things talking about similar things. They can help us understand why, and we can get useful information to benefit not only the winemakers, wine distributors, but also the wine consumers. So there are lots of informations, lots of different opportunities or topics can be discovered. And it is basically like data science people's job to retrieve those information and then provide to the audience. So I really appreciate the opportunity provided by OIV and to share my research and my enthusiastic about the wine. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chen, for all your contributions. And thank you again to all dear speakers for your wonderful participation and for your enlightening ideas. I had a great time. And I want to also thank the audience for being wonderful listeners and for all your wonderful questions. Thank you very much.